Here's the uncomfortable truth. Deep down, your brain often treats future you as more distant than present you. Researchers found that when people imagine their future self, brain scans show patterns similar to when they think about strangers. No wonder tomorrow's version of you always seems like someone else's problem. But what if those broken promises aren't laziness? In this video, we'll look at tools like micro-experiments, environment design, shadow integration, and accountability that work with your brain instead of against it. For now, grab a pen and notebook. Hold them for 10 seconds. You'll need them for a quick experiment later. Your brain thinks future you is basically a stranger. Think about the last time you promised yourself you'd finally break a habit or start something new. Maybe it was setting the alarm an hour earlier, or deciding you'd write every day, or telling yourself you'd actually fold the laundry tonight. In the moment, you meant it. But when the time came, it felt like a completely different person had made the deal, leaving you to carry out something you no longer cared about. That isn't just laziness. It ties back to how your brain perceives the link between present you and future you. Researchers at Stanford ran experiments where people inside brain scanners were asked to imagine themselves years into the future. What they found was striking. Activity in regions like the medial prefrontal cortex shifted when people thought about their future selves. Those signals resembled patterns the brain often shows when imagining strangers, not when reflecting on one's current self. In other words, some parts of your brain treat future you as an other, not identical to you, but categorically distant and outside the present self. This difference helps explain why lofty commitments collapse so easily. Your brain draws a subtle boundary. The present you making the promise feels real and immediate, while the imagined future you is processed in ways that resemble how you think about unrelated people. That creates distance, and distance erodes responsibility. If you don't feel the exhaustion or deadlines future you will face, then skipping actions now feels almost reasonable. Why stress today for someone your brain doesn't fully register as you? This perspective reframes why delayed goals feel so slippery. It's less about having no willpower and more about having a perceptual gap. Psychologists call this self-continuity, the degree to which you feel connected to your future identity. When that connection weakens, your brain quietly assigns the work, the discomfort, and the payoff to a stranger you might never really meet. And here's the everyday cost of that gap. You said you de-exercise, but decided to stay comfortable on the couch. That soreness isn't yours, it's theirs. You told yourself you de-finish the email tonight, but you chose Netflix because someone else, future you, can deal with the tedium. Seen through this lens, procrastination isn't moral failure, it's a form of outsourcing. Your brain protects your current comfort by delegating consequences to the version of you it feels least connected to. Once you see it this way, the guilt starts to soften. Because those broken promises aren't just weak discipline. They're the result of how the brain organizes identity across time. If your future self is poorly integrated into your sense of me, willpower alone won't fix the tug-of-war. That's why attempts to brute force change collapse so predictably. You can summon motivation for a day or two, but the moment stress or fatigue hits, your brain defaults to preserving present you and deferring costs onto the stranger future. Here's the encouraging part, you can shorten that distance. The brain is plastic, it responds to cues and context. One simple exercise supported by research is the future self letter. The step is straightforward. Write one short paragraph from the perspective of yourself 5 years down the line. Imagine future you talking directly to present you. Then, read it aloud to yourself. This small act gives the brain a more concrete, personal image of future you, making them feel less like an abstract stranger and more like a conversational partner. Over time, that strengthens the sense of continuity and measurably increases follow-through on long-term goals. Notice what's happening here. It's not about punishing yourself for failing or endlessly demanding more grit. It's about redesigning how you frame identity across time. Grit is like a push of applause in your head. It's loud but temporary. Continuity creates alignment, which is far more stable. By updating how you perceive future you reduce the need to fight yourself in the first place. That's why this realization matters. Once you understand that your struggles aren't evidence of laziness or lack of character, you can stop trying to cure them with shame. The problem isn't who you are, It's how the brain has carved a line between your present and future identity. And design, not discipline, is the way forward. If you close that identity gap, using tools like letters, environment shifts, or visualizations, you stop treating your life like someone else's responsibility. So the next time you see yourself falter on a plan, pause. Ask if you're really failing or if you're feeling the effects of that invisible gap. When you stop blaming your personality and start addressing the psychological distance, the path changes. You're no longer chasing after bursts of motivation. You're building connection that pulls you forward even when desire fizzles out. Which raises another crucial question. If identity distance explains why we procrastinate, why do quick bursts of enthusiasm still fade so fast? We've all felt it. The buzz of a new system or hack that dies in days. Understanding why that surge disappears is the next step in breaking this cycle. Why motivation disappears faster than your phone battery? Why do those promising new routines or hacks lose their shine so quickly? You start a system, and for the first couple of days, it feels like you've unlocked a secret reserve of energy. You're up earlier, focused longer, and convinced this is finally the one that will stick. Then, almost overnight, that excitement slips away. The habit feels heavier, the spark is missing, and by the end of the week, you're back where you started. The issue isn't that you're incapable or that the hack was worthless. The issue is how motivation works in the brain. Most people imagine motivation as a steady supply of fuel, something you collect and then burn across long stretches of effort. But what scientists observe tells a different story. Motivation often works in short bursts, driven by neural reward signals in dopamine pathways and networks that highlight what feels important in the moment. Novelty, in particular, tends to amplify those bursts. That's why the start of a new habit feels electric. Your brain is tuned to reward newness with energy. But as repetition dulls novelty, those reward signals fade. The routine now feels flat, not because you're broken, but because the surge served its evolutionary purpose and switched off. Seen clearly, this makes disappointing patterns easier to understand. Signing up for an online course, buying a new planner, or sketching out an ambitious schedule lights up your brain with possibility. The energy comes from imagining change itself, not from slogging through the real work day after day. When your brain adjusts to the routine, the novelty and its motivational spark diminishes naturally. This loop isn't failure. It's a predictable blend of reward signals and habituation. The problem is expectation. During those early days, the rush convinces you that motivation should remain constant. So when it fades, you turn it inward, blaming yourself for not holding the same intensity. But the reality is that your brain was never designed to keep generating that level of push. Across human history, novelty was rewarded because it signaled survival, finding new food, tools, or landscapes. Familiarity, in contrast, rarely gave the brain a surge. That's why staying committed to a repeating pattern often feels harder than starting it. You're not stubborn or flawed for losing steam, you're wired that way. This wiring becomes dangerous when people build their whole productivity strategy on daily motivation. They expect each morning to deliver that fresh surge, as if raw drive could be summoned on demand. But depending on motivation to sustain action is like depending on fireworks to light a room every night. Motivational bursts are dazzling and powerful, but temporary by nature. Without something else in place, the dark inevitably returns. So what does work? Systems that keep going when motivation doesn't. Think of an airplane. The engines need thrust to take off, but once it reaches altitude, the plane can cruise with far less effort. Motivation can play the role of thrust. It helps you launch. But once you're airborne, you need habits and environments structured to carry you forward. Here's where the shift happens. Productivity isn't about creating more hype, it's about reducing friction. Every behavior has some level of effort attached to it. If that barrier is high, even the strongest motivational pep talk won't sustain action for long. But if the barrier is low, you almost slide into the behavior without needing to negotiate with yourself. Friction, not willpower, is usually the deciding factor. A classic example is exercise. If your sneakers are buried in a closet, each workout requires an extra decision and action before you even start. But if your shoes are waiting by the door, the entry barrier is smaller. You've stripped away some resistance, which means even when your motivation dips, the action remains within easy reach. These small environmental shifts seem trivial, but over time they outperform the energy spikes you keep expecting motivation to provide. One effective strategy the research supports is starting with tiny habits, micro behaviors tied to routines you already do automatically. Instead of building a system that depends on grand energy, you anchor new actions to stable cues. For example, pouring your morning coffee can trigger a 2-minute stretch or a few sentences in your notebook. The scale is deliberately small so that it feels manageable even at low motivation. By stacking new behaviors onto existing habits, you train your brain to treat them as automatic extensions rather than monumental challenges. Notice what this does. It focuses less on maintaining the emotional high of motivation and more on designing a structure that will gently carry you along. You don't need to feel inspired or driven every day to make progress, because your environment and routines quietly remove the hardest part, the starting line. And each time you repeat that small action, you reinforce an identity, not someone waiting for inspiration, but someone who simply acts. Think about moments when you've relied solely on motivation. The first few attempts feel effortless, like writing every day for 3 days in a row because the initial thrill carried you. Then, by day 4, your energy vanishes. This drop doesn't mean you're unsuited to writing. It means the system you built depended on a resource that was never stable. Imagine instead that you'd placed a notebook on your desk each night with a reminder to write 1 sentence after sitting down the next morning. Even if you lacked a motivational surge, the setup itself nudged you into action. Most days, 1 sentence grows into more. Over time, the act becomes less about waiting for energy and more about being the kind of person who writes. The critical shift is in the questions you ask. Instead of wondering, how do I keep myself fired up every day? Ask, how do I make this action so frictionless I'll do it even when my energy is low? That pivot transforms the way progress feels. It removes the judgment of not being motivated enough and replaces it with choices you can actually control. Setting cues, lowering barriers, and designing supportive environments doesn't feel as glamorous as chasing motivational highs, but it produces steady movement. This also explains why chasing endless sources of hype rarely works. The internet is packed with motivational speeches, viral challenges, and stories designed to give you a jolt. And yes, they work briefly. But just like adrenaline, constant exposure exhausts you. You come down from the high, and if you've built no systems beneath it, you crash. Systems don't care how excited you feel that morning. They continue to operate whether or not emotions line up, and that consistency is what creates lasting results. So the next time you find yourself frustrated that a habit collapsed after just a few days, remember, motivation isn't a defect, it's a spark. It's designed to get you started, not to carry you endlessly forward. Sustainable progress comes from designing structures that keep you moving when that spark burns low. Reducing resistance and anchoring new behaviors to what's already automatic turns discipline into design. Productivity doesn't need to be something you fight for. When the resistance is low, it feels almost natural. And this points to something deeper, because once you understand that motivation is temporary and systems are what sustain you, it changes how you interpret the struggles you feel in moments of growth. When the old boost of inspiration dies off, you may also notice another voice creeping in, the uneasy sense that you don't actually belong in the work you've chosen, that you're somehow faking it. But that feeling has a surprising role to play in growth itself. The gift hidden inside imposter syndrome. What if the uneasy sense of not belonging wasn't a flaw at all, but a clue? This is the hidden message inside imposter syndrome, the uncomfortable belief that you're unqualified, undeserving, or simply faking it when stepping into new spaces. It feels like a warning sign that you should retreat, but often it's a signal of growth. Researchers describe this as an identity gap, the space between who you've been and who you're becoming. That gap unsettles you, but at the same time, it points straight at the places where you're leveling up. Notice when imposter thoughts appear. They rarely show up in familiar routines. You don't wake up questioning your ability to make toast or wondering if you deserve to reply to text. Those things feel safe because you've built a track record with them. The voice of fraudulence surfaces when you accept a promotion, speak up in unfamiliar meetings, or present ideas in front of a new audience. These are boundary-crossing moments where old evidence can't reassure you yet. It's not that you're failing, it's that your identity hasn't caught up with your new reality. the intensity of imposter syndrome often mirrors the significance of the leap. The bigger the responsibility, audience, or visibility, the louder the voice insisting you don't belong. That can be confusing. People assume strong self-doubt proves inadequacy, when in reality it often reflects the scale of growth they're undergoing. Think of it as a system alert, like an update reminder flashing at the edge of consciousness, signaling that old settings can't quite run the new program. In that sense, imposter feelings are less like malfunctions and more like prompts to expand capacity. This pattern is widely observed. For instance, studies of medical students show imposter thoughts spike most when they transition into demanding new environments. Those same students weren't less capable. They were simply exposed to more responsibility, and the mental strain revealed the gap between their old identity and their new role. Importantly, those studies also confirm that imposter experiences often correlate with stress, exhaustion, and risk of burnout if left unchecked. So the message here isn't to romanticize the fraud feeling. It isn't automatically a badge of honor. It's often an indicator of growth, but it can also weigh heavily on mental health if it isn't managed. That nuance matters. Confidence and competence are easy to confuse. Many of us grew up assuming certainty means capability, while doubt means you're out of your depth. But imposter syndrome flips that. The doubt only appears when you're stretching, when the old shell of identity doesn't quite fit the new role. It's a temporary mismatch, not definitive evidence that you don't belong. Think of it less like a verdict and more like a growth pain. Picture someone starting their first professional job. On paper, they've been hired for their abilities. On the first day, though, they feel paralyzed by thoughts of not being ready. Every question in a meeting feels like an exposure test. Every task feels like proof they're unqualified. Yet when you zoom out, what actually triggered those feelings wasn't failure. It was the step into uncharted territory. The brain defaults to uncertainty when identity hasn't yet stabilized. Those fears reflect the gap, not the reality of their ability. It helps to look at it through another daily lens, speaking up in meetings. Maybe at smaller gatherings you felt fine, but the first time you share input in front of senior colleagues, imposter syndrome strikes. Your heart races, you assume others are silently criticizing, and every minor stumble echoes in your head. But again, the trigger wasn't incompetence, it was the expansion of your role. If you map your imposter moments like this, patterns emerge. They cluster around every stretch forward. Reframing imposter syndrome as identity expansion changes the story. Instead of treating the fraud feeling as a stop sign, you can treat it as a marker. The signal reads, "You're occupying ground you haven't stood on before." In many ways, imposter syndrome is evidence of change happening in real time. Like the soreness after exercise, it doesn't feel good, but it reflects adaptation in progress. Without that tension, you'd probably still be standing where you were before. That's the gift hidden in the struggle. Imposter syndrome creates an immediate feedback loop. You don't need months to confirm growth. You feel it each time your brain delivers that nervous protest. While it can be uncomfortable, it is also a rapid signal that progress is underway. External achievements take time to materialize. Imposter moments appear instantly at each boundary crossed. Still, seeing imposter syndrome as a growth signal doesn't mean ignoring its toll. Left unaddressed, the stress can snowball into chronic anxiety, isolation, or burnout. One practical way to counter this, supported by research, is mindfulness. Pausing for even 2 minutes of breath-based grounding can interrupt the spiral and create enough distance to reappraise the thought. The statement, "I don't belong here," can be reframed as "I am adjusting to a new level." You can even experiment with this in the moment. When imposter thoughts surface, close your eyes, focus on one slow inhale and exhale, and notice the shift. Try it, and if you want, share how it works for you in the comments. Another tactic is to track your imposter episodes instead of hiding them. Write them down. When they appear, what triggered them and what the context was. Over a few weeks, you'll likely see a log of growth events, presentations, bigger responsibilities, difficult conversations. The supposed fraudulent moments become visible markers of advancement. When you see them strung together, they no longer look like proof of inadequacy. They read like a record of transformation. This reframing doesn't erase discomfort, but it gives it purpose. Instead of spiraling in shame, you can interpret imposter syndrome as identity lag, a normal delay between action and self-concept. The voice may still whisper that you're a fraud, but recognizing its role reduces its power. You're not trying to eliminate the feeling. You're learning to see through it. So the real question becomes, when that voice shows up, will you let it dictate retreat, or will you recognize it as part of the passage into new ground? Most of the time, the answer isn't about eradicating doubt. It's about walking forward while doubt tags along. That shift is what allows the fear of fraudulence to coexist with the truth of growth. If you can do that, hold the discomfort and still move, you gain a kind of compass. The places where imposter syndrome hits hardest are usually the precise places where your future identity is being constructed. Rather than a reason to back down, it's a signal pointing to expansion in real time. That leads directly into another overlooked source of personal growth: the aspects of yourself you usually try to push away. Because while imposter syndrome maps your progress on the outside, there are parts of your inner self, often hidden or disowned, that can quietly drain your growth if you don't address them. And understanding that hidden side is the next step. Your shadow is stealing your productivity points. What if the traits you've buried because they feel unacceptable are the very ones draining your energy every day? Here's where psychological research gives us a useful concept. Carl Jung described something called the shadow, traits or drives we repress because they don't fit the image we want to show the world. These don't disappear. They keep operating beneath the surface, and the more we try to deny them, the more they shape our behavior indirectly. In other words, your shadow is not just hiding parts of you, it's stealing productivity points without you realizing it.